Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. As a diehard fan of thrillers and police procedurals, the core thematic question of what is justice isn't a particularly new one, but its succinct yet complex nature makes it a question that has seemingly infinite space to explore. In a season where Psycho Pass, one of the anime that grapples with this question the best, at least in its first season, is hopefully making a return to form, it's reassuring that even if that goes south, Babylon will be there to pick up the slack. It's my early frontrunner for anime of the season, though I won't jump to the premature conclusion that it's the next great crime thriller until after we get some more episodes under our belts. In 3 episodes though, Babylon's story feels something like Michael Crichton would have written, at least if my theory is right about the technological direction we're going, and matches the roller coaster story structure with incredibly tight pacing. But giving the writing a run for its money is the direction, from the small things like hard cuts to black, which I freaking love, to basically everything about that interrogation scene in the 2nd episode, which, as you can guess, is the focus of this video. Specifically to talk about how the unspoken language of visual composition tells you everything you need to know about the 2 characters and the shift in power dynamics. Before we get into the mechanics of that scene though, we need to talk about setup. There are actually 2 interrogations, one that is broken up into 4 pieces and injected into the chronological storyline for the sake of priming the audience, and the second, which is kept in its entirety towards the end of the episode. The first interrogation has a letterboxed aspect ratio, which serves both as a unifying element between the pieces and also indicates the first 3's flash-forward nature. By intersplicing these flashes, it creates an expectation in the audience for the scenes that are happening in chronological order, like teeing up the fact that the 23rd is the big day that the investigation to this point is revolving around, which builds up the suspense and tension about what's going to happen on that day. It's small things like this, and cleverly highlighting the relevant days both with obvious title cards and diegetic date keepers, that work in keeping the audience grounded with all of the timeline jumping, but still engaged with the larger storyline, and that's awesome, because it makes clear that the interrogation is the core of the episode while still showing the legwork that got us there. It makes Seizaki, the prosecutor, asking, "Where were you on September 23rd?" a question not only for the woman, but also for the audience to then see what led to that question being asked. It's nice plot threading, but I'm going to be focused on the interrogation scenes because what they're able to say without words is just as interesting as the words being spoken. The flash-forward scenes, the 3 of them, all give us a sense of the tone of the interrogation and the type of person that Emiko Hiramatsu is. Of course, their primary purpose, as we just spoke about, is the priming aspect for the chronological plot thread. But they're also primers for the 2 longer interrogation scenes and how they key up certain concepts and build the atmosphere of the interrogation. In the first scene, for example, the first look we get at her is her eyes. A good cue for one of the crucial aspects of understanding the dynamics of the scenes, which leads to her looking around the room calmly, establishing that she's not nervous. Following that, she ignores the first question posed. She's not particularly interested in being helpful. That trend is continued as she evades the question about her name and instead states Seizaki's name. We'll be picking up the importance of that later, but the best bit of this has to be that her confirming her name is explicitly undercut by the desync in the audio with the cut to black that makes her answer, "Hi?" almost certainly a lie. The second scene is more of the same, as the audience is placed in Seizaki's perspective, watching Emiko intentionally act coy about answering questions. This shot lasts for about 15 seconds as we wait for a non-committal response. It's as though her facial reactions imply a realization that isn't affirmed by words, and that ticks Seizaki off enough that he leaves the line of questioning behind entirely. But my favorite of the 3 flash-forwards has to be the last one, as we're introduced to the sound of the air conditioner with this early establishing shot. And at the critical moment, when it seems like Seizaki has finally established a rhythm, the air turns off and there's dead silence. As she moves her gaze from the vent to the camera in Seizaki's point of view, which is followed by dead silence for another few seconds, before Seizaki jumps in with another question. That last one in particular is phenomenal. The first instance of her asking a question to invert the status quo, and in such a clearly dramatic way with the focus on the eyes afterwards. Especially as the air conditioner comes back on and she begins to answer the questions again, as though that brief pause in the background noise was the realization of an opportunity to change the atmosphere. These three scenes all show tactics that Emiko is using between lying, intentionally playing coy, and breaking Seizaki's rhythm, all while pretending to be an unassuming woman. The fourth interrogation scene, now finally all caught up to the chronological storyline, and the longest section of the first interrogation, is where the visual storytelling really takes a front seat. The first thing that's immediately apparent is how the visualization of Emiko and the ryokan is in 4:3, a huge departure from the widescreen aspect ratio that the interrogations had been happening in up to this point. The warm color palette is a nice contrast to the cold blue interrogation room, and the slight fuzz would have been enough of an indication that this isn't actually a recording, but that aspect ratio change makes it clear that this is taking place either in memory or as a visualization. I say either because it could be Emiko's memory, as it bleeds into her point of view shots with the pouring of liquor and the cloth being removed, but I'm much more inclined to say that it's supposed to be Seizaki's imagination, since all of her responses are given by the dream Emiko, and she addresses the camera directly in there twice, as though it's a blend of reality and dream. Additionally, if it is Seizaki's mind at work, it indicates that he very likely finds her attractive, and is distracted by that and what it leads him to imagine, both a mental edge for her and a representation visually about his struggle to understand her sexual proclivities. The fact that we never see Emiko in the interrogation room until after we've left behind the 4:3 aspect ratio section also empowers this reading. We get plenty of Emiko's POV looking at Seizaki, but the reverse is always in the visualization. And while not an element of direction, the spoken implication that she's fallen in love with Seizaki shows how well she's been playing the game up to this point. The visualization is what makes that aspect of her attempting to control the conversation, the overt sexual nature of Emiko's existence and her actions, stick out for the viewer. But if you came here for explicit visual power dynamics, the final scene, the second interrogation, is what you've been waiting for. Up to this point, Seizaki has been asking all the questions to Emiko. Emiko has had some rhetorical ones back that were ignored and asked a question of the scribe, but roles haven't reversed. Seizaki has been on the left leading the inquiry, and Emiko has been on the right trying to stifle it. And it's all to lead up to this moment, where our aspect ratio returns to 16:9 and Emiko takes over. It begins with her stating that she's willing to sign the confession because she feels sorry for Seizaki, but it's in exchange for something. She wants to know more about him as the background zooms out and Emiko takes up more and more of the frame, moving forward and looking down at the camera to the point where she's dominating the image. Then Seizaki's on the right. He's now answering the question and Emiko slides in on the left, pushing him back until now she's taken control. That establishing of the quid pro quo, a confession for personal information, with her now in the interviewing position, indicates the massive power shift that had been building from the third scene, and leads to a phenomenal ending. As I stated at the top, what is justice is a common thematic question for police procedurals or crime thrillers, but in the second episode, it takes on additional meaning. At the beginning of the episode, Fumio asks Seizaki, what does being a prosecutor mean? Presumably on the face. It's not a question littered with secondary and underlining meaning, it's an honest question that is answered as upholding justice and protecting people. And so while Emiko's questions start off seemingly without purpose, do you have a son, or Seizaki's opinions on contraceptives, it eventually leads to larger thematic questions about contrasting values in society. Seizaki's name was alluded to as important in the first interrogation scene, and as Emiko points out here, it holds the character for justice.
ねえ、Seizaki-san? 正義って何かしら?
This question, which matches the opening of the episode, takes on new meaning. It's not just a reflection on the philosophical discussion from moments ago about society as a whole, but it's also a personal question of who is Seizaki, and what does justice mean to him? And taking this grand societal question and applying it to the individual means that our answer and Seizaki's character development are intertwined. And the implication of the eyes closing in pairs suggests that Emiko is the mirror by which a lot of these answers are going to materialize. Babylon has a lot of other stuff going for it. As you might have been able to intuit, the sound design is pretty freaking cool. And the small touches in story, like Seizaki using Fumio's badge, are pretty fantastic. But at the end of the day, the thing I'm most excited about is the strong writing and direction that the show's made clear in the first 3 episodes. The way that power dynamics are left up to the visual composition, the clever pacing of the interrogation scenes, the thematic question which takes on a personal tone, none of these things are particularly new, but it's always nice to see them being done effectively. I'll be excited to see how the show develops from this point, and you can be damn sure that if Babylon continues at its current rate, it's going to be a must watch.